Okay, welcome to Arroyo Hondo Preserve. So we are about 20 minutes up the coast on the 101 from Isla Vista. So we are 20 minutes west. Remember that our coast in Santa Barbara runs east-west. And we are here at the base of the Santa Ynez mountain range. And Arroyo Hondo is a nature preserve that is managed by the Santa Barbara Land Trust, which means that it is protected forever. So this will always be an open space. It is open to the public, so you can come if you'd like. It's open every other weekend or so. You can check their website, which we'll post a link to on the website. But we're going to see a couple really nice communities here. So we're going to see a nice riparian area. You can probably see some of these really large sycamore trees lining the road here. There's a great riparian area along Arroyo Hondo Creek. And we will also see some very nice chaparral. So we have nice chaparral. You can see it on the two hillsides here. And what's really interesting at Arroyo Hondo, especially comparing these two hillsides, is one of these hillsides burned in the Gaviota fire, which was about just over 10 years or so. And the other ridge of chaparral has not burned in probably about 50 years or so. So you can see some kind of structural differences between those two. And we're going to be heading up into the chaparral that hasn't burned for a while. And we'll see some review plants of some chaparral that we saw at Rattlesnake Canyon, and then we will also see a few new species of chaparral, and we'll also introduce you to a few new riparian species as well. All right, we have some coastal scrub review. So one of the ways that Arroyo Hondo manages this property is they take areas of the preserve that are covered in non-native weeds and they restore it to the native habitat. And so that's what they've done here, is restored this kind of weedy patch to some really nice coastal scrub plants. And there are quite a few plants that you should recognize here. So we've got a shrub right here with yellow flowers and yellow inflorescences. So yellow inflorescences, here is one of those inflorescences. We've got yellow rays and brown or purple discs. So this is Encelia california, the California sunflower, or the California brittlebush, Encelia californica. And then we have this nice gray shrub right here, and if you were here, you could smell it. It smells wonderful. This is Artemisia californica, another coastal scrub species, very soft-stemmed shrub. And then we're going to take a walk over under this tree here, and we'll see a plant that enjoys quite a bit of shade. So you will see it oftentimes in oak woodland understories or places that are shady. So this is hummingbird sage. Hummingbird sage is Salvia spathacea, and we're going to learn quite a few salvias. You've already learned a few salvias on your field trip. So this is Salvia spathacea, a true sage in the genus Salvia. And it is in the mint family, or the Lamiaceae family. And because this plant has nice large vegetative structures, and large flowers, I'm going to go over some of the features of the mint or the Lamiaceae family. So one thing that makes this family really easy to identify is the phyllotaxy. All members of this family have opposite leaf arrangement or opposite phyllotaxy. You can see there's 2 leaves attached at the node here. And the leaves in this family are simple. So an undivided leaf blade, simple undivided leaf blade. And the leaves are oftentimes really fragrant. So a lot of herbs that you use in the kitchen are actually in the mint family because they're very fragrant. So of course mint, sage, oregano, thyme, rosemary, all of those, basil, all of those plants are in the mint family. So very fragrant leaves. This is one of my favorite smelling sages. It smells a little bit sweet and floral. And then I'll go ahead and show you the flowers here. So the flowers are in these kind of tiered clusters. So this is an inflorescence, right? A cluster of many flowers. They're in these tiered inflorescence structures. And then I'm going to pull off one of these flowers. I'll hold it in my hand here. And you can see that we've got a calyx down at the bottom and a fused corolla. So they have these tubular flowers, and oftentimes they've got a lip at the bottom. So here is the corolla, and it's got this lip at the bottom there. And then it's got two stamens and a stigma up at the top. So members of the mint family have these fused tubular flowers, oftentimes with a prominent lip. That's true for the Stachys bullata that we saw out at Rattlesnake Canyon, the hedge nettle. So those are some characteristics of the mint family. But as for this particular plant, the hummingbird sage, it's fairly easy to distinguish between the other sages. It's got quite a bit larger leaves. They're really fuzzy on the underside, right? We can do our little leaf trick where we compare the upper and the lower surface. So the underside, very, very fuzzy and almost woolly and white. And it's got these spade-shaped leaves or sagittate leaves, arrowhead-shaped leaves with these kind of two lobes down at the bottom. And then what makes this hummingbird sage is that it has magenta flowers. So these purple or pink magenta flowers, those are very attractive to hummingbirds. In fact, we just saw a hummingbird fly away from pollinating these hummingbird sages. So hummingbird sage, Salvia spathacea. Oh, one other characteristic of the mint family is that they have square stems. So they have these opposite phyllotaxy, and that leads to them having really square stems. So if I were to roll this between my fingers, you could feel the edges of the stems as you roll through your fingers. So square stems and opposite leaves. We have a new ground cover vine type plant here. This is called the California blackberry, and we are right up on the edge of a riparian area, so you'll oftentimes find this plant associated with riparian areas, kind of right along the edge of riparian areas. California blackberry is in the rose family, so I want to talk about some of the characteristics of the rose family before we talk specifically about the California blackberry, because this plant has some really nice characteristics of the rose family. So first of all, you probably think of pokey things when you think about roses, and that's actually one of the characteristics of the rose family. Is there's oftentimes some kind of serration along the leaf margins, or there's some kind of thorns or prickles associated with the plant, and that is true for the California blackberry. So I'm going to show you the stem here, hopefully without getting poked too much. Ow, ow, ow. And what you can see is it's got these kind of red pointy structures, and those are prickles. Remember, we talked about thorns in class, we talked about spines, and we talked about prickles. So those are kind of the three groups of pointy structures that we oftentimes talk about in botany. So prickles are associated with the epidermis. So they're not associated with a node like a thorn, which is a modified branch, or a spine, which is a modified leaf, but they're modified epidermal tissues. So very, very pokey structures here, and that is common in the rose family. And I'm going to show you the flowers here. So the flowers have 5 sepals and 5 white petals, and many stamens in the center there, and those are characteristics of the rose family. So oftentimes 5 petals. They're oftentimes white. They could also be pink or yellow, and we will hopefully be seeing a pink flowered rose today. But 5 petals and 5 sepals is pretty common. And they have many stamens on the inside. So not 5, not 10, but more than that. Too many to count, so we say many. So those are some nice characteristics of the rose family. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the California blackberry itself. So the California blackberry, like I said, is a vine or a low-growing kind of shrubby thing. It is perennial. And I'll go ahead and show you a single leaf of this plant. So along the stem, here is a single leaf. So this structure right here is a single leaf. You can see the axillary bud in the base there will eventually grow out to form a branch. So that means this structure is a single leaf, and they are arranged one per node along the stem. So one leaf per node along the stem. And the leaf blade can be, but is not always, divided. So in this case, it's divided into 3 leaflets. But sometimes, for example, here's a single leaf. They can be lobed, but not completely divided. Oftentimes you'll see they are divided. And sometimes people actually mix this plant up with poison oak, right? It's got these 3 leaflets, and it kind of grows in a similar habitat and is a similar habit, but this is covered in prickles, and that is one way that you could tell the difference between these 2 plants is blackberry rubus ursinus covered in prickles and poison oak Toxicodendron diversilobum not covered in prickles. Another new plant here, this is poison hemlock. Poison hemlock, scientific name is Conium maculatum. Conium maculatum, and I'm gonna, Devin, I'm gonna have you focus on the stem down here, and I'll talk a little bit about why it's called Conium maculatum. So if you take a look at the stem, you can see that it's covered in purple spots. That's one way that you can actually identify this plant, is that the stem is covered in purple spots. And maculatum means spotted, right? Immaculate, if you have an immaculate face, it's blemish-free, it's spot-free. So Conium maculatum, maculatum means spotted. This plant is in the carrot family, which is the Apiaceae family. Plants in that family have, there's an earwig in there. Plants in that family have highly divided leaves. So here's a single leaf of the Conium maculatum. So it looks very similar to a carrot leaf like you might get on the top of your carrots that you buy in the store. So highly divided leaves, and here are the flowers. It's flowering nicely. And this is an inflorescence. Each one of those little white flowers is an individual flower. And this is a compound umbel. So it is an umbel of umbels. So I'm going to just turn that over. So you can take a look at the underside. So you see this is an umbel, and then there's another little umbel at each tip of the umbel. So it is an umbel of umbels, a compound umbel. Conium maculatum, white flowers, purple spotted stem. And this plant oftentimes occurs near riparian areas, so you'll find it where it's fairly wet. Okay, we've got our review plant here. So you saw this plant out at the Snyder Trail. This is another plant you might find in the oak woodland understory or right along the edge of a riparian area. It's a plant that likes a little bit more moisture. And if you take a look at some of the leaves here, it's got these very round leaves with opposite phyllotaxy. They're quite soft. And this is snowberry, Symphoricarpus mollis. Mollis means soft, and that name comes from the softness, the little hairs on the leaves that make them so soft. And it's flowering right now. So you can see the cluster of flowers up at the tip there. Those flowers are pink, and they will eventually develop into white berries, which is how this plant gets its common name, snowberry. Another review plant, we're still next to the riparian area, so we would expect to see plants that enjoy a little bit more moisture. We have this white-topped cluster of flowers here, smells very nice. And this is the blue elderberry, Sambucus nigra. So it's still in flower here, but there are some clusters that have just started to develop fruits. So these are ovaries that have finished flowering. They've been pollinated and fertilized, and these are immature ovaries that will eventually swell up a little bit more and gain some color, so they'll be a blue color, so that waxy blueberries that were produced in this cluster. Next up is one of my favorite California native plants. This is the California wild rose, Rosa californica. Just like its name suggests, it's in the rose family, and you can see some of the characteristics that we just talked about. So 5 petals here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, they're more of a pink color. Many stamens, so you can see all of these stamens there. Many of those yellow stamens. And it has some spiky structures, right? So it's got these stipules, so these are pokey stipules associated with the node. You can see they're paired right at the node. We could consider those spines since they're technically part of the leaf. And there are also some, it might be a little bit hard to see, but there are some prickles along the rachis, or the extended portion of the petiole. And I'm going to go ahead and pull off a single leaf here. So here is a single leaf. So they're compound, pinnately compound, with serrated leaflets. The margins are serrate. And this plant is blooming like crazy right now. So if you ever see this plant out on a walk or something like that, you should definitely smell the flower. We were just talking about it. I think it smells a little bit like cinnamon. Jason thought maybe a little more like allspice, but definitely a spicy rose smell that is very, very nice. And we also noticed that it's got these really crazy galls. So we talked a little bit about galls when we talked about the willow. So these structures on the leaf that are, these growths that are caused by an insect. So crazy galls here. I've actually not seen these on a rose before. We've got another new plant here. We're still on the edge of our riparian area, and you'll oftentimes find this plant near riparian areas. This is mugwort. Mugwort is the common name, and the scientific name is Artemisia douglassiana. So it's in the same genus as the California sagebrush. Doesn't really look anything like it, but they are fairly closely related. So this is a perennial herb, so a lot of these stalks are probably the same individual. And this plant has some unique leaf characteristics. First off, they are quite different colors on both sides of the leaves. The underside is fairly white or silvery. The upper side is fairly green and glabrous, so not many hairs. The hairs on the underside come from, or the color on the underside comes from very, very fine hairs. And there can also be a range in the lobing of the margins. So I've just got 2 examples here from the same individual plant actually. So sometimes you'll see these lobes on the margins of the leaves, and sometimes they'll be a little bit more entire. And this plant is not flowering right now, but as you might have deduced, because its cousin is in the sunflower family, Artemisia californica, this plant is also in the sunflower family, in the Asteraceae family, and these are probably last year's inflorescence clusters here. So each one of these little individual structures is a head, so many flowers clustered together. Artemisia douglassiana, the mugwort. And there is a legend or myth that this plant will help if you get poison oak on you, so Toxicodendron diversilobum. Potentially you could rub a little bit of Artemisia deglaciana after you get exposed to it, and it might help wash away some of those oils. I have never tried it, but I'm always looking for a student to do a controlled experiment, right, where we have both arms exposed to poison oak. One arm is rubbed with some Artemisia deglaciana and one arm is left, and we'll see how that experiment works out. Okay, we have another review plant in the coastal scrub. So again, this is all beautifully restored coastal scrub here at Arroyo, Hondo, and you probably recognize some of the species in this mix of plants here. But what I would like to review is this individual plant here, which is black sage, Salvia mellifera. Salvia mellifera, so one of our sage species. And you can see quite a difference compared to the hummingbird sage, right? This is a much smaller inflorescence cluster. The flowers themselves are much smaller. These are white to pale purple in color, but still have the same characteristics. They're tubular. And the leaves are quite a bit different as well. So here is a single leaf. Quite a bit smaller, doesn't have the same arrow shape as the hummingbird sage. But black sage, Salvia mellifera. Mellifera means honey bearing. The bees really love this plant, and we were just noticing that it's actually quite covered in bees right now. So Salvia mellifera, black sage.
You guys have your pulses slow for your
Okay, we've got another new plant here. This is black nightshade, or Douglas's nightshade. We're kind of on the edge of a little shady area, and I'm noticing that there are some plants here that do enjoy some shade. So you might find this plant in an oak woodland. You might also find it in some coastal scrub communities. But the scientific name of this plant is Solanum douglasii, and it's in the Solanaceae, which is one of your required plant families. So I will go through some of the characteristics of the Solanaceae family. All right, so I've got a little branch here of the black nightshade, or Douglas's nightshade. And the first thing I want to point out is that it has simple leaves. So here's a single leaf, undivided leaf blade. If you were to break this leaf open and smell it, it would smell a little bit acrid, which is true for many plants in the nightshade family. So if you have tomatoes at home in your garden, if you ever trimmed them or anything, you might notice that they kind of smell a little bit acrid. This plant is actually in the same genus as both tomato and potato. They're both in the genus Solanum. So simple leaves on the Solanaceae, but what is characteristic are their flowers. So here's a cluster of flowers on the Douglas's nightshade, and what I want to point out is they have a fused corolla. So even though these are kind of lobed, they're still fused. So this white corolla there is a single fused corolla, and we'll see a couple other members of the Solanaceae and you'll see the same characteristics. They have a fused corolla, and they have 5 stamens, all of which in the genus Solanum are kind of oppressed against each other in this column, but they are actually separate from each other. So you can see, you can separate them into individual stamens there. So they're kind of all grouped together, but they're not fused together. So we've got these fused corollas, simple leaves, and the fruits of this plant can either be berries or they can be dry capsules. And we might see some dry capsules on a plant called Datura rhytii when we eventually meet that plant. But the black nightshade has, as its name suggests, black berries, which are not black yet. But here's a cluster of berries there. Those will eventually turn black, and they are poisonous, but they look like little tomatoes. You can see the leftover sepals up at the top there. So so they will eventually turn black. So the black nightshade has blackberries, that's how it gets its name. And I wanted to go over a few more characteristics of the flowers of the black nightshade. So the flowers of the black nightshade have white corollas, and they're pretty deeply lobed, and that'll be different than another plant in the genus Solanum that we will meet, which has corolla lobes that are not very deeply lobed. So black nightshade, Solanum douglasii. Alright, so we're continuing along the trail here. We've reached a crossing in a riparian area. This is Arroyo Hondo Creek, flowing very nicely here after some of our late March rains that we've gotten. And we've got a couple review species over here right on the edge of our riparian area. So we've got this tree here, this large tree, and if I were to break open one of these leaves on the tree, it would smell like something in your spice cabinet. So this is the California Bay, Umbellularia californica, right here next to the riparian area. So it's a riparian-loving species. And then we have another shade-loving species here. So this is our other yellow-flowered aster, but this individual has yellow discs in the center. So this is the canyon sunflower, Venegesia carpecioides. So canyon sunflower with the cordate leaves, so the heart-shaped leaves, shade-loving plant. Okay, so we're here again on the riparian area. We've got a couple more riparian species to review. So we've got this gorgeous old sycamore tree. One of my favorite things about coming to Arroyo Hondo is they have these beautiful big sycamore trees with gorgeous bark, gorgeous roots. So remember, it has that white mottled bark, and you could probably tell just from that shot that it's got all of those knees and right angles up in the tree from its relationship with that fungus anthracnose. And we've got another review tree here. So when we first met this species in Rattlesnake Canyon, we saw a little tiny one, so this one is a little bit bigger. And this plant has these very characteristic veins on the underside that are parallel to each other. They all seem parallel to each other. So pinnate venation, but the side veins are very strikingly parallel to each other. And we've got this kind of toothed leaf margin here. So this is the white alder, Alnus rhombifolia. And we've got another review plant. I'll go ahead and pick it up off the ground. So this is another shade-loving understory plant that you met at the Snyder Trail. So it's got these very characteristic whorled leaves. This is bedstraw in the genus Galium, which remember is in the coffee family. So one of our fun families on our list. So Galium in the coffee family. Galium means milk, and this plant was used to curdle milk, so that's why it's called Galium. Okay, we are under a little oak tree here, so it's quite shady, and we have a few review plants here that you might typically find in an oak woodland understory. So first we have this shrub here that has got fairly round little alternate leaves. They're not very exciting, but if you look at the undersides of the leaves, they're a little bit yellowish. So this is the redberry rhamniscrosia. Redberry rhamniscrosia. And then we've got another little plant here. So opposite leaves, little tiered flower clusters, these pink tubular flowers with the large lower lip. And this is the hedge nettle, Stachys bolata. And those characteristics should sound fairly familiar. This is in the mint family. So hedge nettle, Stachys bolata. Two plants, the rhamniscrosia and the hedge nettle that you might expect to find in an oak woodland understory. Okay, we have another little plant here, another nice review plant, kind of sticking up out of this shrub, and it's got opposite leaves and these little tiny red flowers here. Little tiny red flowers. Got those two little lips. They look a little bit like opera boxes. This is Scrophularia californica, the California figwort. Scrophularia californica. Okay, we have another new plant here, and it's in full bloom. Couldn't have asked for anything better. All right, this is the sugarbush Rhuus ovata. So it's in the same genus as the lemonade berry. It's in the Anacardiaceae, the cashew family, and so it has some characteristics of the cashew family. It has these leaves that are oftentimes glabrous, right? So no hairs on either side of these leaves, and it has glabrous leaves. No hairs on either side. And it has a terminal inflorescence, a panicle, right? So this is right at the end of the stalk. And these flowers have 5 little white or pink petals. And it's in full bloom right now. So sugar bush. And I actually have some lemonade berry right next to me, so we can take a look at these two plants together and talk about how you can actually tell the difference between them. So first, the sugar bush flowers a little bit later. So you can see this plant is still in flower. This plant is almost entirely in fruit now, the lemonade berry. And then the leaves themselves are a little bit of a different shape. So here I've got a single leaf of the lemonade berry. On this side, it's got a rounded tip, and a single leaf of the sugar bush, which has a pointed tip. So the difference between the rounded tip lemonade berry and pointed tip sugar bush is another way that you can distinguish between these two species. So, sugar bush, Rhuus ovata, and ovata refers to the shape of the leaves, which are ovate or egg-shaped leaves. Okay, we are here in the chaparral, so hard-stemmed woody shrubs. You can see it's quite a bit taller than my head here. And this is a review plant. So this is the big pod ceanothus. And last time when I introduced you to this plant, it was not flowering, but there are still some flowers left on this plant. So I wanted to show you the clusters of white flowers. And they have these really beautiful dark centers to them. So at the base of the petal is kind of a dark color, so you can see right at the center they've got this dark center to them. So big pod ceanothus, Ceanothus megacarpus, again named because of the relatively large fruits. So here are the fruits. Remember, they have these 3 carpels, so kind of three-sided ovaries there, that when they eventually fall off will leave that Mercedes-Benz type symbol. So Ceanothus megacarpus, big pod ceanothus. Okay, we have another review shrub here. This yellow flowered shrub you first met at the Snyder Trail. This is deerweed, Acmispon glaber, and it's still in full bloom here. I've got a nice flower stalk there, and you can see that the newer flowers are yellow. The older flowers are kind of turning this orange color there. And this is in the pea family, the Fabaceae family. And I'm going to show you some of the leaves. They're a little bit closed up right now, but remember they have 3 little leaflets, so they're all closed up. We're here at the hottest part of the day on quite a warm day, so all closed up, but 3 little leaflets on each one of those individual leaves. So deerweed, Acmispon glaber. All right, we have another new plant here. This is a non-native plant, and you can see the individual right here. It's kind of sticks out, but this is a plant from South America that has invaded some communities in California. This is the tree tobacco, Nicotiana glauca. It's in the Solanaceae family. And we talked a little bit about some characteristics of the Solanaceae family, one of which is having a fused corolla. So these have yellow corollas that are fused together, and they've got 5 little tips on the corolla petals, so you know 5 petals fused together to form this tube there. And if we were to look down inside, we would see 5 stamens in there as well. And these flowers are starting to develop into fruits. So these are the immature ovaries there, those green structures. And once they become mature, they'll actually dry out and split open. So remember I said that some of the members of the Solanaceae family have berry fruits and some of them have capsule fruits. So this is an example of one of the members of the Solanaceae family that has capsule fruits. Are you still recording? Mm-hmm. There are quite a few members of the nightshade family that we eat. So I already mentioned tomatoes and potatoes, but a lot of other foods like peppers, so all types of peppers, bell peppers, spicy peppers, as well as eggplant are all in the nightshade family. And sometimes people avoid eating those because they are associated with having some kind of toxins and inflammation in your body. And one famous person that doesn't eat any nightshades is Tom Brady. So who knows, maybe that's why he's had such a long career. Okay, so we are still here in the chaparral, and we have a new chaparral species, which is the chaparral yucca. So these basal plants with a basal rosette, those very long, spiky, sword-shaped leaves, and there's an old flower stalk coming out there. So the scientific name is Hesperoyucca whipplei, and this is a really neat chaparral plant. It is a monocot. So those long, sword-shaped leaves with parallel venation should give you an idea that those are monocots there. They look a little bit bluish purple, so they have kind of a glaucous color to them, and they produce that very large flower stalk that you saw. So very large flower stalk with these beautiful white flowers, and it has a symbiotic relationship with a pollinator moth that will pollinate those flowers, and in exchange for pollination services, that moth can lay some of its eggs in the ovary of the Hesperoyucca whipplei, so that chaparral yucca. All right, we have another review plant here. This is Chemise, Adenostoma fasciculatum, and when you met this plant in the past, it was not flowering, but now it is flowering, and you can see that it has these white flowers. It's in the rose family, so you can test yourself on how many petals you expect it to have and how many stamens you might expect it to have. It's a little bit hard to see because they're small. But if you were to take a hand lens or something like that, you would see that it has 5 white petals and quite a few stamens. So characters of the rose family. And remember that it gets its name Adenostoma fasciculatum from those fascicle-like bundles of leaves there. Very small, and very little evaporation happens from those leaves. So a great adaptation to the chaparral. We can all attest that it is quite hot out here today. Okay. All right, we have another new plant. This is another member of the chaparral, and this is kind of a viney shrub type plant. This is called climbing penstemon. Climbing penstemon is in the Plantaginaceae family, which is not one of your required plant families. And I'll go over some of the characteristics of the climbing penstemon. So first we can take a look at the stem here. It has, get the deerweed out of the way, it has opposite leaves, so 2 leaves attached at every node. And they are heart-shaped, so cordate leaves with teeth along the margins. So opposite heart-shaped leaves. But of course the most characteristic part of this plant is its flowers. So these gorgeous red tubular flowers here that bloom in the springtime. So gorgeous red tubular flowers. They are produced at the ends of the branches. So you can see this is at the tip of a branch here. We have this cluster of flowers. And once the flowers are pollinated, they will develop into capsules, so a dehiscent dry fruit that splits open when it's mature. So climbing penstemon.
What's the scientific name?
The scientific name is Kekiella cordifolia. So scientific name, Kekiella cordifolia. Okay, we are in the chaparral here, in a little understory of the chaparral, and we've got a new plant in the sunflower family. So we've got these beautiful yellow clusters of flowers, and this is golden yarrow, Areophyllum confertiflorum. So golden yarrow is one of the chaparral species, and it's got these yellow heads here. And we can get a close-up shot of those. You'll see that they have both ray and disc flowers, both of which are yellow. Ray and disc flowers are yellow. And then I want to show you some of the leaves here. Oh, did you not focus? Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got yellow ray flowers, yellow disc flowers there. So inflorescences, clusters of flowers. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at the stem there. And you can see that the leaves are forked. So we've got little baby leaflets off the side there. So not a simple leaf, but this kind of forked leaf. The stems are quite white, and that's because they're covered in hairs. So forked leaves, little clusters of yellow heads and yellow discs. These are quite a bit smaller than the Venegesia, the canyon sunflower, Venegesia carpecioides, or the Encelia californica. So these are quite a bit smaller. And clustered together. So the heads are clustered together versus on the canyon sunflower or the California sunflower, they're individual or solitary heads. We've got a little review point here. This is a wildflower that's coming up out of a bulb. Dicylostema capitatum, blue dix. All right, we have another chaparral species here, so you can see that we are in an area where the soil is quite shallow. These plants are basically growing right out of the rock. There's lots of bedrock exposed here, so that gives you an idea again that the soil is very shallow. It's a very dry environment, and we've got a new chaparral species here. This is the California buckwheat. It is a shrub. This is quite a large individual. And the scientific name is Eriogonum fasciculatum. And that specific epithet might sound familiar to you, fasciculatum. We have also learned another plant that has a specific epithet, fasciculatum, which is the chamise. So this is Eriogonum fasciculatum. And as you might expect, the reason it has that specific epithet is because of the little fascicles of leaves. So there are little bundles of leaves along the stem here. So little bundles of leaves there. The leaves are a bit larger than they are in the chamise, but one way that you can really tell the difference is that the Eriogonum has this really white, woolly underside to the leaves, and that's true for many species of Eriogonum or species in the buckwheat genus Eriogonum, is they have these woolly white undersides. And in fact, Arroyo actually means woolly, so Eriogonum. Eriogonum fasciculatum, and it's not quite flowering yet, but it has these little pink and yellow flowers, very similar to the Eriogonum parvifolium that is also on your list, and we will either put some pictures or find some of these in flowers so you guys can see the flowers of the Eriogonum. In fact, I think there's some flowering down there. Excited run?
Yeah.
Okay, so here are some of the flowers of the Eriogonum. So Eriogonum fasciculatum flowers, these white kind of pinkish flowers there. Made it out of the chaparral, and now we're coming back into a riparian area. We'll probably be in a riparian area for most of the rest of the field trip, and there's a few species here that you should recognize. So first is this fern here. So I'm going to grab a single leaf of this fern, and it's got some red hairs down at the base of the petiole there. Red hairs down at the base of the petiole, so that should indicate to you that this is a wood fern. Dryopteris arguta. As also bipinnately compound, so not just divided once into leaflets, but actually twice into leaflets. You can see the sori on the underside of the leaves there. Those are the clusters of spore-producing structures. And one more review plant is this guy right here, which I'm not going to touch, so that should give you a clue about what it is. So we've got 3 leaflets that are lobed, but sometimes diversely lobed. So this is Toxicodendron diversilobum, the poison oak. Toxicodendron diversilobum. Okay, we have another one of my favorite California plant species. I know I say that a lot, but this is a really great one. This is the giant chain fern, and you can see it's quite a bit larger than the other ferns that we have learned so far this quarter. And the scientific name is Woodwardia fimbriata. So Woodwardia fimbriata, the giant chain fern. And this is a single leaf right here. So it's about my height or so. And it is bipinnately compound, so it's divided once into leaflets and then again into leaflets. So here is one of those leaflets here, because I want to show you the sori that are on the underside. And you can see that these are a little bit of a different shape than the other sori that we've seen, which have been fairly round, and these are kind of more elongated sori, but they're the same structures, right? They're clusters of sporangia that produce spores. Remember, this plant reproduces by spores. And we're right on the edge of a riparian area. You probably have a good sense that ferns need quite a bit of water. So there's a great little patch of these chain ferns right on the edge of Arroyo Hondo Creek. This is the same creek we've been following the entire field trip here. So giant chain fern. We've got a couple other plants to show you in this area that are on your required species list. One of which is right here. You should recognize this plant from Intro Bio as well as from EEMB 127. This is a horsetail in the genus Equisetum. So this is again a plant that reproduces by spores. This is a vegetative structure. It will actually reproduce, it'll produce a reproductive shoot that'll have a cone-looking structure up at the top with spores inside of it. So this is an entirely vegetative structure. And almost all of the tissue, basically all the tissue that you're seeing here is all stem tissue. So it has these whorled tiers of stems, and this plant has silica dioxide or glass inside of the cells, so it's actually kind of rough. Sometimes it's called scouring rush. So horsetail fern or scouring rush in the genus Equisetum. So one of the plants that you only need to be able to recognize to genus.
On the leaves.
All right, so I said that it was mostly stem tissue, but there are some leaves. They're a little bit difficult to see here. I'm going to see if I can, here we go, I got it. So I just pulled off some of the stem tissue, and you can see up at the very tip there's these whorl of kind of pointy structures there. Those are the leaves. So similar to the ephedra, when we went on our plant walk in EEMB 127, we saw ephedra when I said that the leaves were very tiny and scale-like, it's very similar to this plant. It has tiny little scale-like leaves. You can see them a little bit better there. So there is a whorl of those little scale-like leaves on the kind of main stem of the plant. So horsetail, equisetum. And one more plant here. So we are right at the edge of a riparian area. There's some oak trees. So oftentimes oak woodlands will kind of line the edges of riparian areas. Remember, oak trees do need a little bit more moisture. And we have a plant here that you only need to know the genus. You met a plant in this genus when we were at Rattlesnake Canyon. This is the genus Ribes. And you met the currants, and this is a gooseberry. So I talked a little bit about the difference between currants and gooseberries. Currants do not have any spines or prickles, and gooseberries do have spines and prickles, and I can show you some of those structures. So first, you can see the berries themselves are covered in prickles. So those are some immature berries there, covered in prickles. And you can also see that there are some prickles along the stems. So there are some pokey structures there as well. So the currants and the gooseberries are both in the genus Ribes in the family Gracilariaceae. But remember, the currants do not have any prickles or spines, and gooseberries do have prickles and spines. So this is probably one of the only plants that we might actually ask you to tell us the common name and be able to give us the correct common name. So you should be able to tell the difference between a currant and a gooseberry based on whether or not it has spines and prickles or whether it lacks spines and prickles. Are you recording?
Yep.
All right, so we just met the giant chain fern, and one of my favorite parts about Arroyo Hondo is this entire patch of chain ferns. It really feels like we are somewhere much further up north than we are with all of these ferns. You can see that they are crowded in this understory of oak woodland. So these are all giant chain ferns, Woodwardia fimbriata. Just a really, really lovely part of this preserve here. All right, we are still in this oak woodland understory with all the chain ferns, but we do have another new shrub for you to learn. This is the coffeeberry, Frangula californica, in the Rhamnaceae family, which is the same family as the ceanothus that we have learned. And this is oftentimes can be a fairly large shrub. This is kind of a smaller one. And I'm going to show you some of the characteristics. So it's not flowering right now, but it does have some kind of greenish yellow boring flowers that will eventually turn into fruits that look kind of similar to a coffeeberry fruit. They can be a little bit red and they turn black and are about the size of a coffeeberry fruit if you've ever seen that. But we'll just take a look at the vegetative characteristics because I actually do think it has some nice vegetative characteristics. It looks, on the underside, it has these very distinct veins. So this is one way that I identify this plant is these really distinct kind of raised veins on the underside of the leaves. And it has this very, very slight serration on the margins of the leaves there. So Frangula californica, the California coffeeberry. I think, again, the most striking characteristic is those veins on the underside of the leaf. All right, we've got a nice review plant here with the purple flowers, and you can see they've got 6 petals and a little yellow center there. This is blue-eyed grass, Cicericium bellum. Remember, not a true grass, not in the Poaceae, but in the iris family, the Iridaceae family. Right. One more new plant here is another member of the Solanaceae, or the nightshade family, and this is Solanum xanthe, or purple nightshade. So it's in the same genus as the Douglas's nightshade, Solanum douglasii. But the way that you can tell the difference between these two is one, the color of the corolla. So these are oftentimes more purple, although they do
vary from very dark purple to almost white. So the corolla color can be a little bit misleading, but the corolla shape is definitely different. So these, you can see, have a fused corolla, and they're not as deeply lobed as the Douglases or the black nightshade. Remember, that had very deep lobing between the actual lobes of the petals, and these are almost like dinner plate, kind of a solid corolla. So Solanum douglasii, this one also has some fruits on it. So here are the fruits of the Solanum xanthi. They are quite large berries, and it does have characteristics of the tomato family, which is of course the fused corolla, as well as the simple leaves, so undivided leaf blades that are arranged alternately along the stem. So Solanum xanthi, the purple nightshade.
All right, we've got another little review plant here. This is a small version of one of the plants that you saw out at the Snyder Trail. This is blue oak. It's a little baby blue oak. And you can see that there's some of that blue glaucous sheen on the leaves there. So it does look a little bit blue. So it's got these simple leaves with a bit of lobing on the margins there. But what we want to show you is that there are some female flowers on this individual that are going to eventually develop into acorns. So you can see there's some clusters of female flowers. There is what will eventually become the acorn cap down at the base. That's a cluster of bracts. And you can see a little tiny brown stigma just peeking up out of those bracts. That's the top of the ovary, of course, and the ovary will eventually swell and develop into an acorn, which is a single-seeded nut, an indehiscent fruit. So blue oak, Quercus douglasii. And I have a tattoo of it, Quercus douglasii. All right, I hope you enjoyed our field trip out to Arroyo Hondo. We saw some really nice plants out here. We of course saw this really beautiful, pristine riparian area that's running north-south up into the south side of the San Ynez Mountains, and we saw some review species like the sycamore trees and the bay trees and the alder trees. And then we headed up into the chaparral. We saw some really great review chaparral species like the ceanothus and the chamise, as well as a couple new chaparral species like the climbing penstemon and the yucca. And that is all that we have for you today. So thanks for watching.